hadn't planned on crying that morning. Not while wrapped in an old satin dressing gown with a chipped mug of tea in one hand and the weight of 68 years of living in the other. But grief, like memory, arrives uninvited. Had rained overnight. The smell of wet earth drifted in through the slightly cracked window of my little cottage tucked beneath the hill where William and I built our life. That smell always reminded me of the early days. Before the children, before the cancer, before the long silences that filled our rooms after he was gone. I stood in the bedroom, mirror fogged from the shower, hair slightly damp and falling limp around my shoulders. The robe I wore clung loosely to my frame, one that had softened with age but still remembered what it felt like to be admired. I wasn't crying from sadness exactly. It was something more complicated, a mix of emptiness and too much feeling all at once. My daughter Emma had called the night before. She wanted me to visit. Said it had been too long since I'd left the cottage, since I'd seen anyone who didn't live in memory. I made some excuse. I always did. When William died 11 years ago, I had tried to stay afloat. I baked, I planted flowers, I joined a reading group. But then one by one, the books lost meaning, the flowers wilted, and the oven stayed cold. Loneliness is clever. It doesn't arrive as a wave, but seeps in slowly, replacing noise with quiet, dinners with cereal, touch with the absence of it. That morning something in me cracked. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the tears fall, not caring if the mug slipped from my hands. I wept for the woman I used to be. For the way William looked at me when I wore that dress to our anniversary dinner. For the way he used to run his hand down my back when no one was looking. I stood and pulled the robe tighter around me. My reflection looked back, older, softer, a little sad, but not broken. I took a shaky breath and walked into the living room. I hadn't noticed how quiet the house had become. The clock ticked. The rain dripped steadily from the gutters outside. I wandered to the hallway closet and pulled out a dress I hadn't worn in years. Navy, long, modest but flattering. I used to feel powerful in it. I slipped it on slowly, smoothing the fabric over my hips. Something about the act felt sacred. As if I were stepping into myself again. I brushed my hair, added a touch of lipstick, and looked at my reflection one more time. Then came the knock. First I froze. No one ever came by. I hesitated, then opened the door. A young man stood there, around 30, holding a delivery that clearly wasn't mine. His eyes widened slightly as he took me in. Woman in her late 60s, dressed like she was going somewhere important, eyes red from crying. I think I have the wrong house, he stammered. I smiled faintly, blinking away the last of the tears. That's okay. We all end up at the wrong door sometimes. He paused, glanced down, then said quietly, "Are you all right?" And that simple question, one I hadn't heard in so long, hit harder than I expected. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just nodded and said, "Thank you." After he left, I sat at the window for a while. I watched the clouds thin. I watched the garden that William had built with his bare hands. I remembered how he used to hum while he worked, how he smelled like fresh soil and aftershave. And then I stood. I pulled on my coat and boots, grabbed my keys, and left the house for the first time in weeks. I drove. No destination. Just the road and the wind and the feeling that maybe, just maybe, I was still here. When I finally stopped, I was at the art store in town. I hadn't painted in 20 years. Inside, I found a small canvas, a few tubes of color, and a brush that felt familiar in my fingers. I paid in cash and returned home. By late afternoon, I was standing by the window in my kitchen, sleeves rolled up, painting something abstract, something with swirls and blue and gold and longing. It didn't have to mean anything, just had to be mine. The days that followed were different, not suddenly joyous or loud, but alive. I began writing again too. Letters to Emma. Notes to myself. Little lists of things I wanted to do. Learn to make sourdough, visit the lake again, call Miriam from the old choir group. Each morning, I wore the navy dress for no reason other than how it made me feel. Sometimes I cried. But more often I didn't. Grief never leaves entirely. Just changes shape. Some days it's a shadow in the hallway. Other days, It's a breeze through an open window. But that morning, the one with the satin robe and the tears and the stranger on the doorstep, it shifted something. It reminded me that I was still capable of feeling, of healing, of being seen. And that, in itself, was enough.